I'm so happy to be with you all today. The sunshine, it's so nice and warm. Did you hear that I'm living in Boston now? I was honored by Andy's invitation to be with you today and offer this sermon on your very special Vision Sunday. I have admired Andy and his ministry since I met him only 4 years ago, but I've had the privilege of watching him lead worship and lead in other ways, and he is one of my very favorite ministers. I also want to thank Kelly and Deanne for helping me prepare for being with you this morning. Not only are they wonderful to work with, so welcoming, but I felt from them your energy and spirit. It's clear to me that they both love it here. I'm thinking, thank you very much, but I'm thinking, having met a few of you before the service started, that they are not actually the only ones who love it here. Do you love it here? Yes. What is it? Oh, yes. Just tell me a few things you love. Community, sermons, friends. Music.
Inclusive. Community.
Amen to all of that. I suspected all of this, actually, because it's only in communities with a strong sense of identity, purpose, and affection that big dreams happen. And you all are dreaming some big dreams. It's very clear that you believe what you're doing matters. That it matters in the lives of your members, and that it will matter in more lives as you grow and welcome more people, and that it matters in your larger community. Why else would your vision include another service? Phew. Expanding your staff and ministry, extending the work of service and justice, and welcoming more people. All of that, maybe this has occurred to you, is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of commitment, your time, your talent, and your treasure. I am not here to tell you this because you don't already know it, of course, but I hope that my being here will help you see yourselves and your gifts and your potential even more clearly. I want to begin with a story from the Hebrew Bible. This is an adaptation from the Midrash, the early rabbinic interpretation. Midrash is the practice of filling in the gaps of the old stories and using a story to help us find meaning and inspiration for our own time and our own challenges. This is not fake news. This is a story. It's a story that was told to help people know themselves better and to remember their gifts and to inspire them to honor themselves, each other, and the gifts they have to bring. Moses and the Israelites were finally escaping the terrible slavery that they had suffered in Egypt. For a long time, Moses had promised that he would set them free, and he had tried. But it had taken years and years and many plagues for them to finally believe that they might escape to freedom. Gathering all the courage they could muster, they followed Moses. The Egyptians, though, were right on their heels, getting closer all the time. The Egyptians were armed. The Israelites had nothing but the word of Moses. Then, well, you know what happened. They got to the shore of the sea, and there was nowhere for them to go. That's not quite how I remember it. Anyway, Moses looked around, and behind him, people were starting to panic. He could hear them actually making other plans, wondering aloud if slavery might not have been so bad after all. So Moses asked God, what are we supposed to do now? And God answered, a little annoyed, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, take the next step. Keep going. When Moses conveyed the message, there was palpable anger in the crowd. Moses had been making promises about freedom for ages now. Now he wanted them to walk into the hungry sea? The murmuring grew louder, and a little chaos broke out. Some of them started to turn back, to surrender and hope the punishment wouldn't be too bad. But then, a hush moved through the crowd. People were pointing. They could not believe their eyes. There, one of the old Hebrew men, Nashon, was walking into the water. He waded in up to his ankles, the water flowing over his feet. What was he thinking? Then the water was up to his knees, and he didn't stop. As the water reached his waist, he did slow down a little. The weight of the water forced him to slow. The Hebrew people stood in stunned silence, watching Nashon take the next step and the next. Was it courage? Was he just giving up? Before any of them could shout that he needed to turn back, the water had reached his shoulders and his chin and his mouth, and as they watched, the people lost the ability to breathe themselves. And then, you know what happened. Then the sea parted. Like two enormous waves moving in counterpoint, the water rose up and made a way. The rabbis say, the miracle happens only when you have faith and courage enough to take the next step. The rabbis might have said, if they'd been on the Valley UU website, that faith, after all, is a verb, right? But come on, who does that? What kind of person walks into the sea? And who is this Nashon anyway? Have you ever heard of him? Last week, Andy asked 3 questions in his sermon. What kind of world do we want? What then shall we do? And just to be clear, is a better world possible? I love the sermon. Did you? Most of you heard it? That thing with the finger? That was amazing. So if you didn't hear it now, you'll definitely go to the website so you can see the thing with the spinning finger. It was great. All of it was really good. So I want to add, or at least tease out, another question from what Andy already said, and that would be the question of what kind of people do we want to be? I have to tell you, I am pretty sure that I would have been one of the Israelites who murmured objection to Moses' call for them to walk into the sea. I might well have turned around and headed back to my familiar bondage. In my own way, I know that I have done that in my life. But not every time. Sometimes I find my courage and take the next step. I hear a story or a song that calls out more from me than I knew was possible. Sometimes I witness courage that makes me feel just a little bit brave. That is one of the reasons I need religious community, stories, songs, and you, because I've seen, well, not exactly you, but I have seen courage and faithfulness in our congregations that calls me back to my own courage and my own faithfulness. Some years ago, way back when everyone could not legally get married, you remember that? we were planning a Valentine's Day witness event at the county courthouse in Fairfax, Virginia. We were moved to do this in part because there was a family in our congregation that was forced to leave the state because one of the parents was not legally allowed to adopt her children. Our hearts were broken by this. And so our Valentine's event was our way of doing faith, of making faith a verb, being faithful. Faithful to them, to Paula and Kelly. Faithful to what we know about family. Faithful to the ideals of love and justice that we share. Another family in the congregation stepped forward to help us draw attention to the injustice that made so many vulnerable. Karen and Barb, both retired after careers in the Navy, in a committed relationship for more than 25 years, decided that they would step forward into the county courthouse and ask the clerk to grant them a license to be married. So after 26 years of faithfulness to each other, Karen and Barb asked the state to recognize and give legal standing to their relationship. The answer was clear. They would not be recognized as a couple. They knew this would happen, and despite knowing it, Karen and Barb walked right into the courthouse and asked anyway. Who does that? I know you've never heard of Karen and Barb, but I'm here to tell you that for them, this was an act of faithfulness. They were faithful to our country in service, even as they had to hide their relationship in order to serve. They were faithful to each other, and they kept faith against many voices that sought to deny their deepest values and commitments. Who does that? Maybe you would have done that. Maybe I would have. Not every time, but together, borrowing courage, calling out the best from each other, singing songs of hope. We are braver than we would be without each other. You've seen it happen. I know you have. Who does that? You haven't heard of Nashon? You haven't heard of Karen and Barb? Who does that here? What are the names of the people who come to your mind and your heart when you think of that courageous next step? I'd like to hear them.
This one, Beverly.
Thank you. Together, borrowing courage, calling out the best in each other, singing songs of hope. We are braver than we would be without each other. We can do more and be more together. With vision and affection and purpose, we find the courage to take the next step. One more story. Also, not fake news, but to be really clear, I don't have all the facts. A group of progressive people gathered to have some pizza. This is the only congregational origin story I am aware of that includes pizza. There might have been beer. I don't know. But they were clear-headed when they discovered that they shared a hope to build a vibrant, inclusive community that was inspired by many spiritualities and many theologies, and that together they wanted to care for one another through life's challenges and to bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice. They might not have used exactly those words, but that indeed was their vision. They could not have imagined us here today in this beautiful, special place with 250 chairs set up outside for lunch, with this congregation holding bold dreams for your future. They couldn't have imagined this, but it was their next steps, their courage, that made all of this possible. And it is your next steps that determine everything that will happen in the next 5 years, and the next 10, and in 50 years, when people gather again. I don't actually believe that anyone has ever parted a sea with the wave of a hand. But I am 100% certain that faithful people drawn together in hope make a better world.